Welcome, everybody. This is Kate with Writer Access. We're so glad to have you here today for our webinar, How to Optimize the Content Experience for Crazy High Conversions with Hana Abaza at Uberflip. Hopefully you guys can all see my slides and hear me okay. Shoot a message in the chat or raise your hand if you're having any troubles, and we're happy to help you out. So before we begin, I've got a few housekeeping items to let you know. This webinar is being recorded. You can look for an email with the recording and slides from Writer Access either later today or early tomorrow. We'll have a bunch of time for Q&A at the end. Hannah's got a great presentation, and we want to make sure you get your personal questions answered as well. So if you hang tight to the end, there'll be about 15 minutes for Q&A. And you can join the live Twitter chat with hashtag WriteOn. We'll be tweeting along at Writer Access, sharing some of the slides, and I know a lot of the attendees like to chat as well, so you can use that hashtag to participate. Now, you may be wondering, where is Byron? He's the usual host of this webinar. Well, today Byron is speaking at Future M on building your content marketing dream team. That's a live picture of him speaking right there, and that's the Writer Access booth from this morning. So we're missing him today, but glad that he has this fantastic opportunity to speak, and he will be sharing the slides from his presentation shortly. So you can look for that on Twitter as well. And who am I? I am Kate. I'm your host for today's webinar. I'll be moderating Q&A, and I'm going to be stepping out of your way quickly. I'm the events manager here at Writer Access, and I actually met the Uberflip folks recently, and they gave me one of their fantastic headbands, which I sometimes baby wear to the gym. So I bet that those headbands are very, very popular. That's a picture of some of the Writer Access and Uberflip team down there, but we love those, Hannah.
That's great.
This is your expert today, Hana Abaza. She's a VP of Marketing at Uberflip, contributor to the Huffington Post. She is a speaker at our event, our annual event, Content Marketing Conference, and she can literally kick your butt. She's a black belt and a professional martial arts instructor. So we are super excited to have you here today, Hana. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Kate. Excited to be here.
Wonderful. So I am going to get out of the way and make you the presenter so you can share your slides. But I think before you dive into the content, we've got some poll questions. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's it. And it would be great if we could sort of launch the poll and get everybody to answer a couple of our questions. So, Kate, I assume you're going to launch that on your end?
Yep. So the first question is, what kind of business are you? B2B, B2C, or B2C2B? Which you'll have to fill me in on what that is, Hannah.
For sure. And actually, maybe while people are answering, B2C2B, just real quick, some really good examples of that are some of the sort of sales enablement tools you see out there, or a tool like Dropbox, where oftentimes people will adopt that tool individually for their own use, and then if enough people start to use it within an organization, it all of a sudden becomes something that the organization starts to adopt across the entire company. So Dropbox is a really great example of that. A lot of people just started using it on their own, and then when Dropbox kind of had that B2C model down where consumers were using it, they kind of went back to business, so B2C to B.
That's really interesting. I've never heard the term before, so this is a learning experience for me. I'm sharing the results now. It looks like most of you guys voted, and 2/3 are B2B, just under a third is B2C, and actually 10% fall in that B2C to B category. So
interesting.
We're glad to have you guys here. Hopefully you can see those results, Hannah. Yep. And one last poll. Thank you guys so much for sharing about yourselves. It's very helpful for us to learn about who's here. So this one is, what is your primary content marketing goal? Is it brand awareness, lead generation, engagement, sales, or customer loyalty and retention? I can tell you over at Writer Access, our main goal is lead generation, but often a lot of the goals go hand in hand and one comes with the other. What about you guys over there at Uberflip?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, especially sort of the ones that we have here today, it's almost like there's a bit of a trickle effect. So it's often when people have the goal of both brand awareness and lead generation. But it's good to really know which one is your primary goal, so that when you're kind of optimizing your content and your content experience, which we'll talk about today, it kind of gives you a good sort of guideline and objective to work from.
Awesome. All right, I'm sharing those results now. It looks like a little more than half of you guys fall in category with us where lead generation is your primary goal, engagement, sales, customer retention, and brand awareness then fall in that order. So
awesome.
That's it. Yeah, that's a nice some variation there. So I'll hide the results, hand it over to you, and I'm getting some attendees chime in saying they also are martial arts practitioners. I don't know if that's the word, but we've
that's awesome.
Mark Z is an orange belt, so congratulations, Mark. Glad to have you, and he's really impressed.
Well, thank you. It's definitely something that hits people sort of in the face when I say that, I was teaching martial arts professionally for almost a decade. Most people don't expect that, so it's always good to meet other fellow practitioners. So good to meet you, Mark. So super excited to have everybody here today. So Kate, you can see my slides, okay?
Yep, they look great.
Fantastic. So today we're actually going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is really around how do you actually kind of take your content to the next level and really optimize for conversions, because at the end of the day, most of us have our goals that we're optimizing for. And I think we saw that when we did that poll. For a lot of content marketers, lead generation is a big, big key to our success. But we'll also take a look at how to actually optimize for some of the other goals as well. So a little bit about Uberflip. So what we do at Uberflip is we provide a content platform that actually helps marketers create, manage, and optimize their content experience. That's why we really love this topic, because we kind of live and breathe content marketing, not only within our own marketing team, because it's a big part of our own strategy, but our customers are doing it day in and day out, and we're talking to them about how they can better leverage it using Uberflip, but also just in general, how do you really leverage your content overall. So I want to, before we dive into the meat of the content, I want to take a little bit of a step back. The title of this webinar was around really optimizing that content experience, and I want to make sure that we all understand why that's incredibly important. So I love pina coladas, but do I want to be sipping my pina colada in somebody's backyard here overlooking a shed and a garbage can, or do I want to be sipping my pina colada on a beach in Hawaii? Now, I think the answer to this is obvious. I would much rather be drinking that pina colada on a beach with the sun and, the sound of the waves and the sand beneath my toes, because it's a much better experience. It might be the exact same pina colada. It might taste exactly the same, but at the end of the day, the experience is what makes the difference for me. Now, this is very similar to your content, right? You might have the exact same blog post, you might have the exact same words on the screen, but the experience is really what's going to set you apart. So when we take a look at content marketing, and we actually look at content marketing way back, content was really crowned as king, maybe, I would say 5 to 7 years ago, somewhere along those lines. And when content kind of took its throne, all of us marketers said we have to publish all of the time and keep our editorial calendar as full as possible. It was really all about quantity, quantity, quantity. Now, as we were publishing all of this content, we also realized we had to get links from all of the different places. And that's where we really ended up in the conundrum that we are in today, where we've got over 150 million blogs on the internet, we've got over 50,000 free ebooks that were published last year alone, and that doesn't even begin to touch on guides and white papers and webinars and other forms of content. So the reality is we need better content, not more content. And I think after we all got over that mantra of publish, publish, publish all of the time and started to realize that, the last few years have had some really prominent thought leaders in this space talk about the need for better content, and not necessarily just more content. And in fact, Anne Hanley, which I think we all know and love in the content space, she's the chief content marketing officer at Marketing Profs, she really talks about how great content is useful, inspired, and pathologically empathetic to the needs of the people you're trying to reach. So better content is key, and I think we all kind of know that now. So I don't think that's something that we're sort of falling short on. Maybe we're not always able to execute on really high quality content depending on your resources, but we all know good content trumps it. But then we need to take a step back, and there's really more to it than that for the good content strategy. If your content is published but it's not shared, does it really exist? And this is where we bring in Jonathan Perlman's famous quote, "Content is king, but distribution is queen, and she wears the pants." And this idea, again, has become more and more prominent. It's not just about creating content. It's not just about creating quality content. The reality is you need a good distribution strategy. So that kind of starts to bring us to where we are right now. And the reality is most of you guys know this, right? So if you're listening to this webinar, chances are, you've already sort of dug your teeth into what content means, what a good content strategy is, how to start to execute on it, and you're making ridiculously good content. You're not just focused on quantity, although that does make a difference. You're also focused on quality rather, and your content is everywhere. You've got a distribution channel in place, and people are actually clicking on your content. But then what happens? You send them to your backyard instead of that beach in Hawaii with the beautiful sun and sand and waves. And this is where a lot of us fail when it comes to content marketing. This is why content marketing fails for a lot of companies and doesn't actually generate the results that you need. It's because the experience isn't optimized to meet your goals. Now, if your experience is lacking, realistically, you're going to wave goodbye to subscribers, you're going to lose leads, you're going to potentially lose customers, and at the end of the day, that means lost revenue, which, let's face it, for most of us, content has to become that growth driver that is really impacting the bottom line for it to be worth it. So how do we actually start to fix this? So I'm going to go through the key elements of a high converting content experience, and then we're also going to dig into some real life examples, and I'm going to show you some case studies on how you can optimize for different goals when it comes to your content. But before that, let's take a look at just the experience itself. So I've got a little acronym for you. High converting content experience is what I call SASE. It's scannable, actionable, shareable, scalable, and you-oriented. So let's see what those look like. Now, when I say scannable, really that just means it's easy to read, it's well formatted, and people can get instant value just by kind of scanning through it and understanding where they should be focusing their time and effort, what section they should be reading, or maybe diving deep into the whole blog post or article or ebook. So this is a really great example of an experience that's really, I think, well done. It's very clean, it's very simple, it's very easy to read, and that oftentimes just comes down to the design and the font size and the contrast between the font color and the back of the page. This is actually an example from First Round Capital. It's actually a venture capital firm that does a fantastic job when it comes to content marketing. A couple of others, as you scroll down this page, you can also see that they take care and make sure that their paragraphs aren't too long. We've all been there when we're reading something and it's just a big block of text. Never fun to really read through that. It actually kind of starts to grate on the eyes after a little while. The shorter the paragraphs, the easier it is to scan through the content that you're reading. Subheads are also a really good idea to make the content a little bit more digestible and break it into parts. So a couple of little tips there in order to make your content scannable and really let people kind of derive that instant value from it. Now, next one is actionable. So this one is actually incredibly important when it comes to optimizing that experience to meet your goals, whether your goals might be increasing subscribers or lead generation, which I think a lot of us are in the boat for lead generation today. Making sure that your content is actionable and that you created an engagement path is critical. And that engagement path could be a variety of different things, but one of the things that it needs to include eventually is call to actions. So when you're looking at calls to action or CTAs, those are some of the main drivers to actually getting to your goals. But there's a way to do it right, and there's a way to implement call to actions and really not see any benefits. So let's look at how to do that. Let's start off with that engagement path. I love taking IKEA as an example. So when you walk into IKEA, what's the first thing that you see? You walk in, you look down, and you see probably a big black arrow. Now, IKEA does an excellent job of essentially creating this path for you throughout the store. They deliberately take you past different displays that they've set up, different bins with little knickknacks that you can grab. Why not buy a pillow or, you know, a throw or something along those lines that you're just sort of walking past? They do a really good job of that, and they want to take you past all of those things because they know that the more likely you are to see a lot of those things in the way that they've arranged them, the more money you're going to spend with them. And we as content people need to start to look at our content in the same way. We need to also take a look at how to create that engagement path. So when we're looking at creating an engagement path for our content, we need to start to think about what happens after the person has consumed that piece of content. So they're reading a blog post, then what? There should be some way to recommend additional content for them. They should be able to surface content that's in line with what it is they're reading, with what it is they care about from a topic perspective. And we should be doing things like encouraging comments, encouraging engagement that way. And then, of course, we should be including those calls to action. Now, talking about calls to action, there's a few things that we want to make sure we remember when we talk about CTAs. And good CTAs, whether we're talking about them in the context of, you know, a landing page or a website, or whether we're talking about them in the context of our content marketing, there's really three things that you want to remember: clarity, context, and targeting. Those are really going to go towards making your CTAs more effective down the road, and that really means more likely to hit your goals. So clarity is the first one. Now, I absolutely love this picture, and actually, Kate, I took this picture at the Content Marketing Conference last year at the hotel in obviously Las Vegas.
I love it. So for those who don't know, Content Marketing Conferences, Writer Access hosts this annual event, and Hana was a speaker last year, and hopefully will be with us again next year. So I love that you took this there.
Yeah, and I think it was perfect because I'm standing in the elevator, I'm thinking about, oh, how am I going to structure the call to action section of my presentation? And I look, and there's this great call to action for me to go to the casino. And this couldn't be a more perfect example of clarity. I know exactly where they want me to go. I know exactly what button they want me to push, and I know what the value is when I'm going to get there. I'm going to get to go to the casino. Now, whether that's good or bad, that really depends, but you can see how obvious it is. They're really trying to drive me in a very specific direction here. It's not the ground floor, it's the casino. So this is a really good example of clarity when it comes to CTAs. And CTAs, incidentally, they're not just exclusive to websites. You can see those everywhere in all walks of life. So next thing that you want to remember when it comes to CTAs is context. When you look at this picture, you might think, hey, I must have Googled really sad man or man crying or something like that when I did a Google image search. But the reality is context is everything. And it's not the saddest day of his life, it's actually the happiest day of his life. So we need to think about context when it comes to how we use our call to action. So here's a really good example that I like to use. A while ago we published a post called Advanced Marketing with Smart Filters. And Smart Filters is one of the Uberflip features, and it's really one of those things for more advanced marketers. But right beside it we had a call to action that said, hey, here's an ebook for 10 beginner marketing tips. What's the disconnect there? Doesn't make sense, right, guys? I've got an article for advanced marketing, but then I put a call to action that says, hey, check this out, beginner marketers. I'm not going to get any conversions on that. But if I put a call to action to a piece of content or to something that's much more related to the actual topic, now we're starting to get somewhere. Now I'm going to be more likely to get people to click on that call to action because, hey, it's actually aligned with the topic that they're already reading about. So important to think about not just implementing CTAs, but implementing contextual CTAs. The last thing I want to talk about when it comes to CTAs is targeting. Now, this is my very favorite CTA ever because it's highly, highly targeted and it's got like 100% conversion rate. Batman is always going to come when you put up that symbol. So how do we take that and how do we translate it into our own content marketing? So here's another example, from our own Content Hub. This is an article we posted called Top 10 Marketing Automation Resources. Actually did really well. We had a lot of people coming to this article, a lot of really good tips here when people were looking for content marketing resources. And you're looking at the article right now in sort of the main feed of our Content Hub. So the way our Content Hub is structured is, we've got latest content, but then we also have these really custom streams of content where we can reorganize our content in different ways. So you're looking at it here, it's in the main feed of our content. On the right-hand side, you see a call to action that says, hey, you can create a hub like this one with Uberflip. Now, that's a very generic call to action. But what if I actually take this article and I put it into a custom stream of content that was especially curated for people that use Marketo? So this stream is called Everything Marketo. This makes sense for us because Uberflip integrates with Marketo. So a good portion of our customers use Marketo, a good portion of our audience actually use Marketo as well. We read a lot of content around how content marketing and marketing automation work together. So if I know you're using Marketo, I'm going to send you here, right? Now, take a look at that call to action. It's no longer a generic CTA. It's actually much more tailored, much more targeted to the person viewing this piece of content. It doesn't say, hey, try Uberflip. It says, hey, take Uberflip and Marketo for a test drive, because we know you're using both. Even the color is more closely related to Marketo's brand colors. So you can see here that this is a much more targeted way to use CTAs, especially if you have an idea of where your users are coming from and you have some data around them. Next up is shareable. So again, we've got our acronym SASE, we have scannable, actionable, this is shareable. And I don't want to spend a ton of time on this one because, guys, you all know this. You need to make your content shareable and you need to make it worth sharing. So if it's useful to somebody, they're going to pass it along to their friend, their colleague, their mom, depending on what the article is about. So obviously, content itself has to be quality, it's got to be worth sharing. But the reason I wanted to bring this up is because one of the biggest and most easily fixed things that I see is that people don't actually give a mechanism to share. You're almost, not even asking people to share your content. So you have to make sure that you've actually got a mechanism within your content experience to actually share. And what I mean by that is you need share buttons. You need to ask people to tweet it, to Facebook it, to share it on LinkedIn, on Pinterest, whatever makes sense for you. And there's really, really easy ways to do that. And one of the things that I hear often from marketers, especially at some of the bigger companies where you're sort of mid-market or more enterprise, is that you don't really have control over that experience. A lot of times the developer, the IT team has control over that. But there's a lot of really easy things you can do. So number one, you can use a platform that gives you control. That's what we do at Uberflip. And then you can also use really simple things like these share buttons. On this example right here, that's add this, which is a really, really simple thing to add to any website or any blog. In this case, I'm showing you an example of Booker.com, who is a customer of Uberflip, but they also use Share This for their social sharing. So start to think about that in terms of how you can make your content more shareable, not just the content itself, but the whole experience. Now, next up is making your content scalable. And when I talk about this, I'm not talking about how to scale your content creation or your content marketing. There's great resources on that topic already in terms of how you can do it internally. And you know what? There's a lot of great companies that can help you scale your content marketing. Writer Access being one of them. But how do you actually scale the experience to make sure that it fits to any screen size? That's what we're talking about when we talk about is your content scalable. And the reality is, I think we all know how important making your experience mobile friendly is. We've all seen the uptick in mobile consumption. We all know those numbers. We've been preaching them as marketers for years and years and years. But, what happens if your content doesn't scale? What if it's not responsive and not mobile friendly? Well, number one, you're going to feel the wrath of Google, especially after some of the more recent updates. And number two, you're going to sacrifice conversion rates. If somebody goes to your blog or to your resource center from their phone and they have a difficult time consuming the content because it's not mobile friendly, they're going to probably bounce off. They're probably not going to click on your CTA because it's impossible to click from. And at the end of the day, you're going to lose out. So make sure that your content experience is scalable to any screen size. And last but not least, is your content view-oriented? So I kind of took this as a little bit of a play on Jay Baer's book, Utility, which is a great book for any content marketer out there. It's a must-read. But when I'm talking about you-oriented, I'm really talking about, is your content tailored and personalized? Is the experience organized in a way that your target audience can find what they need and that you're surfacing the right content for them? And that really comes down partly to how you organize that experience. And when we take a look at how to organize your content, a lot of us as marketers look at sort of top of the funnel content, middle of the funnel content, bottom of the funnel content. But we can take it a step further and actually start to organize our content by topic, by content type or format, by vertical, maybe even by persona, depending on what makes sense for your company, for your business model. And remember that your content has to be easy to find for your audience, but it's also got to be really easy to find for your team, especially in this scenario where you have a sales team and content is part of that sales enablement process. They have to be able to find that content easily as well. So it's got to make sense in terms of how it's organized. Now, what I often see people do, especially when we're talking about that really high-value, rich, premium content, is I see people organize it by type. And what I mean by that is they'll put all webinars together, then they'll put all the white papers together and all the case studies. So here's the problem with that. I'm never going to go to somebody's site and say, I want to read a webinar, or I want to read a white paper, rather. And I don't care what it's about, it's just got to be a white paper. I'm never going to do that. What I am going to do is I'm going to go to someone's resource center and say, hey, I have this problem around this topic and I need to find something that's going to help me solve it. It's not about the format, it's about the topic itself. It's about the problem and the solution. So here's a better way to think about organizing your content marketing. Now, this is a company called Belly. I love their resource center. This is also powered by Uberflip, so they are also a customer. But really, I mean, depending on what CMS you're using, you can really organize your content any different way. They do it by topic, but then also by content type. So if you want to sort of understand more content around customer acquisition, which is one of their topics, you can click on that, and then you can also browse by type if you're interested in a specific type of content. Here's another great example, a company called Avanti. For them, it actually makes sense to split it up by role. So when they take a look at their different audience segments and their different personas, they have people coming in from the payroll department, they have people coming in from the HR department, they have finance come in, they have ITs come in. Obviously, the content that they're going to be creating for HR is going to be different than the content they're creating for the IT department. So it's important that you guys organize your content in a way, again, that makes sense for your audience. If I come to Avanti's site and I'm from HR, I know exactly where I need to go. And last but not least, here's an example from us at Uberflip. I mentioned before, we talk a lot about marketing automation because we integrate with marketing automation tools. So our audience talks about it a lot. Our customers use it a lot. So we actually created custom streams of content for specific audience segments that we've got. So we have a segment of our audience that uses HubSpot. We have another segment of our audience that uses Marketo, Eloquat, Pardot. So you'll see how this allows us to create a really targeted feed of content just for those people. And again, the more targeted it is, the more targeted I can make the call to actions, the better the whole experience is for that particular audience segment. So you're probably saying, okay, this is all great. This is helping me with my content experience, helping me make it a little bit more engaging, a little bit higher converting, but how do we actually generate leads from this? And I was really happy to see that a lot of you have that main goal of lead generation. And even if that's not your main goal, you're still going to see some really good tips and hints throughout as we go through the rest of these slides. So let's start to think about what the three main ways are to sort of generate leads through content. So number one, you can leverage your blog. So your blog tends to be sort of that ongoing narrative of your company. Number two, you can gate premium content. And oftentimes premium content sits in something like a resource center on our website, and some companies actually will combine their blog and their resource center, and that's kind of what we do with one big content hub. So gating premium content is an excellent way to generate leads, and there's different ways you can optimize that whole process. And then of course live and on-demand webinars, and we'll get super meta at that point because we're going to talk about how to do webinars while we're doing a webinar, so always love doing that. But let's start at the top. So how do we leverage the blog? Now, the blog is one of those things that, yes, it can be great for lead generation, but I want to take a step back for a minute, especially sort of to think about the maturity of your blog and think about how do you actually grow that blog audience so that you can leverage the entire audience to then generate leads. Now, this is a really great graph that actually was from Anam Hussein's blog, and she's a great growth hacker at HubSpot. Love the stuff that she does in terms of working with their growth team, and she actually put it in a really succinct way, and she said this is mostly how people actually think about their blog. They publish a post, they share it, then they hope that they're going to get a lot of traffic, and then they hope that they're going to get some leads. But this is actually a much better way to think about it. So number one, we publish the post, then we should email it to our subscribers, because that's what our blog should be really focused on. Then you're going to get the guaranteed views from those subscribers then they're going to share it for you, and then you're going to get guaranteed some leads. So don't just think about lead gen with your blog. Think about also growing your overall audience and building your subscribers, because at the end of the day, that's going to feed into a more robust lead gen strategy. A couple ways you can think about doing that. So this is an example of Noah Kagan's website, okdork.com. He actually changed the design and implemented this, what you see here on the screen, as the top half of his website. So this is not a pop-up. This is the entire top half of the site. And when you go to that site, this is the call to action. This is what he wants you to do. You know that's what he's optimizing for. And what I love about this is, number one, the design is clean, it's slick. Right away you can see the value of what you're going to get when you put your email address in, and there are no other distractions. There's no top menu, there's no nav to pull you away and have you clicking elsewhere. If you really don't want to fill in your email address, you can scroll down to the bottom of the page, and there's other stuff that you can dig into there. And this actually saw an 8% conversion rate, and this is up from 2% compared to what he was doing before. So if you're really focused on subscribers, be bold in sort of how you start to collect those. And I think that's one of the things that we're not bold enough at when it comes to our building our email lists. We don't always ask when we should, or we don't ask as often as we should. Here's another really great example. So instead of maybe having the entire top site, top part of the site focus on it, maybe you just want to have that consistent form embed. So this is Kissmetrics blog. Again, fantastic blog when it comes to marketing information, data, analytics, etc. But if you take a look on the left-hand side there, they've got that great little form embed. So you can put your first name in, your email address, and you're subscribed right away. Here's another example. This is essentially based on exit intent technology. So if you go to leave HubSpot's blog, they're going to show you this little pop-up, and they're going to say, hey, are you sure you want to leave? Why don't you subscribe? So we'll let you know when the next awesome article is out. And there's a lot of different technologies you can use to do this. Bounce Exchange, Conversion Monk, obviously HubSpot's got a tool to do this, and Uberflip also has an overlay that you can use for this. And we've actually implemented a very similar type thing where we're using that sort of pop-up or that CTA overlay, and we were actually able to boost blog subscribers by 9x in 1 month with this guy. So this made a really big impact in terms of really growing our audience. So next up, gating content to generate leads. So we know we can leverage our blog to build subscribers. It's going to help increase leads. You can also include call to actions on your blog for more premium content as well. But how do you actually gate that content and optimize so that you can actually maximize the amount of leads that you generate? So before we get into that, a couple of quick things around should you gate it or should you not gate it? And inevitably this question always comes up. And the reality is you've got to make that call, right? So if your goal is leads and that's your main goal, then you want to be obviously gating content that's worth gating. And that's the key factor here is your content high value enough? Is it useful enough in order to ask people to pay for it with an email address? Because essentially that's what you're doing. If the answer is no, it's not quite that valuable, we didn't invest quite that much time and effort into doing it, then don't gate it, then leave it. If the answer is yes, then definitely gate it. So, to give you an example, a webinar is a form of premium content. An ebook, a white paper, something that kind of goes in depth around helping inform or educate or give practical tips and hints is generally something that you can gate. Now, if your goal is mainly awareness, then it might be a good idea to reach it, because the more accessible your content is, the more likely it is to spread. So you can always kind of come back to this graph and take a look at it, and that'll help you determine whether or not your content is worth gating. Now, let's say you've got a piece of content, maybe it's an ebook or white paper or a special guide or something like that, and you want to gate it. Now there's two approaches to gating content. Number one, landing pages, and number two is overlay CTAs. So both have their time and place, and the idea is that you want to be able to use both depending on what it is you're trying to accomplish. So when you're thinking about landing pages, a couple things to remember. You want it simple, clear, and concise. You want to think about those call to actions in the same way that we thought about them before. So your call to action has to be clear, contextual, and very targeted. It has to basically be clear what's going to happen when I click on that button or that call to action. You want to optimize the forms on your landing page for your goals, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. And you want to humanize the page a little bit, and generally speaking that tends to work better if you've got either some sort of social proof, or maybe you've got a photo and a bio of the author to give credibility, or something that will actually help people relate to why they need to actually download this piece of content or access this piece of content. So the other option for getting content is the CTA overlays, and this is a little bit of a new one, but I'll go through this with you. When you're doing the CTA overlays, and you can see an example of it in the screenshot there in the background, instead of having a big landing page, it's just that little overlay that kind of blocks the content. And you want to remember to keep a concise message because you don't have as much real estate as a call to action. So context really, really matters. If they're just landing on that page sort of out of the blue and they don't really know why it's gated, you need to make sure you communicate that properly. And of course, the source of the traffic matters here. So here's an example of us using an overlay CTA to gate a recorded webinar. And in this case, they can know exactly what they're going to get, so learn how to create CTAs that get clicked when they fill out that form. We're eliminating steps with the CTA overlays, so normally when you're doing this with a landing page, you got to fill out the landing page, and you get to another landing page that says, thank you for filling out that landing page. Here's the button to access your content, and you got to click on that, and then you get your ebook or white paper. In this case, we're really skipping some of those steps, and we've had customers actually test this in comparison to a traditional landing page, and this converted for them about 250% higher. So it really depends on the use case and the context, but it's helpful to be able to do both, test both, depending on the scenario and the goal. So again, here's another quick example of an overlay. So if I click on that Facebook marketing guide, I get the overlay. This is from Booker.com site. They've done a great job really getting this piece of content. I fill out the form and I'm in right away. So again, I don't have to go through all of those steps. I can access the content immediately. So moving on to landing pages, if you're looking at using landing pages for gating content, then a couple things you want to remember. This is a great landing page from the folks at Unbounce, and you want to make sure you've got some key factors here. So number one, the value prop has to be clear. People have to know what they're going to get by downloading this ebook. It's got to be enticing. It's got to be something that they're willing to pay for with an email address. We've got credibility here, so we've got a little bit about the author. We're kind of humanizing it a little bit. And there's a huge amount of trust here because Joanna Lieb is the go-to when it comes to copywriting, or one of the go-tos when it comes to copywriting. So if she had a hand in creating this ebook, then chances are you're going to get some really good stuff out of it. We've got a relevant image, we've got a very clear call to action, so when I click download the ebook now, I know I'm going to get to download the ebook now. And what's interesting here is that they've only got really one field. There's a drop down as well, but there's only one field that people have to fill out, and generally speaking in marketing, the shorter the form, the higher the conversion rate. Generally speaking, all other things being equal. But is that always what you want? And I say this sort of with a grain of salt, but sometimes higher conversion isn't always necessarily the main goal. And I'll give you another example. Here's an example from a landing page that HubSpot's done. And in this case, they've got all the same elements. They've got a descriptive value proposition, a clear call to action, relevant image, but they've got way more fields. Now, in HubSpot's case, you can kind of derive what their goal is here. It's not necessarily just conversion. It's not necessarily, hey, I want as many people to convert as possible. It's a little bit more around, I want the right type of person to convert. So in this case, it really looks like they're trying to qualify these leads. And that actually might be the best scenario for them, because if they're passing off the people that fill out this form, the leads from this form, to their sales team, they want as much information as possible so they can determine what's a really qualified lead versus not a qualified lead. So don't think of conversion in a silo. Think of also what your overall goals are and optimize your forms based on those goals. So here's one last example of a landing page that is really around smart fields and progressive profiling. And this is kind of where we at Uberflip find a happy medium. So this is a landing page from a webinar that we did with the folks at Visually. And we usually like to have sort of 3, 4 forms, or fields rather, within a form, sometimes a little bit more depending on what we're doing and what the goal is. But we can start to grab more information from people by using something called progressive profiling. So in this case, you can see the fields are already filled out because we've got smart fields enabled. So I already know who the person is. They've visited my site before. They filled out a form before, so I'm going to make it easy for them. The forms are going to be already filled out, or the fields are going to be already filled out, and all they have to do is click the button. So if you're using marketing automation, pretty much any marketing automation form will do that if you're doing a landing page from that. And the other aspect of it is progressive profiling. So let's say I have 8 fields that I want to include, but that's way too many for my form. So maybe I include the first 4 and I queue up the next 4. And then the next time somebody returns to sign up for another webinar or another ebook, then I'm going to show them the next 4 fields. So that's kind of a way to gradually collect data over time about that person. So I've given you a ton of examples, and the reality is not all of it is going to work for you, and what works for me is not necessarily going to work for you, and vice versa. So what you want to take away from this is not that you should be creating a landing page with 4 forms. What I want you to take away from this is that you should be trying and testing all of these different things, or the ones that make sense for your model. So here's a really great example of people kind of taking that to heart and putting testing into practice. So Monetate is one of our customers, and I just love using them as an example because it just shows how big of an impact one very easy to implement test can have. So they took their traditional landing page, which they normally use to gate a quarterly ebook that they release, and they tested against an overlay CTA. And this took them all of, I think, an hour to set up, not even, because the landing page template was already set up. All they had to do was add the CTA. And then they tested one over the other. I believe it was just like a 50-50 A/B test, and they saw a 250% increase in conversion in the CTA overlays. Now, think about that. This is a major source of lead gen. This content is really aligned with who they want to become their customers. So a 250% increase in conversion, it actually translates to a huge volume of leads into their sales team, and it actually translates to a huge pipeline increase as well. So really understanding that testing, even little things, can actually make a huge impact down the road. So the last thing I'm going to talk about, guys, is just the idea of using webinars to generate leads. And I told you we were going to get super meta, so bear with me here. And what I want to do is, webinars are becoming more and more prevalent. It seems that I get, dozens of webinar invites in my inbox every week. But the reality is webinars are actually incredibly well attended. They're a great format to actually communicate with your audience, and you get that extra little bit of engagement that you don't get on a blog post or an ebook. And that's why I love webinars, because I feel like I can actually engage with you guys, especially in something like the Q&A section. So I want to give you a framework for how to start to think about implementing this within your content strategy. So number 1 in the planning process. If your focus is lead generation, then your topic has to be really focused and very aligned with your ideal customer. I was recently chatting with a marketer who is marketing at an HR software company, and she was doing all of these webinars, but they weren't generating leads for her. And it turns out that a lot of the webinars she was doing were really more geared towards marketers than HR people. So no wonder she wasn't getting the leads that she needed. So we've had really good success with very bottom of the funnel type topics that are really closely related to the solution that we're solving with Uberflip. Now, that doesn't mean we're talking about Uberflip during the webinar. We're not, but we're picking topics that are closely related to what it is that we need to do. Now, obviously, it goes without saying, as you're planning the webinar, you really need to have a dynamic presenter. You really need to streamline the process and the operations, because the last thing you want to do is scrambling on the tech side and on the process side of it right before the webinar is starting. So really make sure you streamline this. There's a lot of different software that can help you do that. Now, the other thing you want to think about before the actual webinar itself is really around sort of that distribution and promotion side of things. So I'm thinking about my webinar, how am I going to really distribute it and promote it? So leveraging partners is great. I mean, we partnered with Writer Access on this webinar. We do a lot of partner webinars, and the idea is that we want to partner with people that are speaking the same language as we are, that have a similar audience as we do, and that's what you should be thinking about doing for your business as well. You want to figure out the right channels, just like any other marketing campaign, and you want to make sure you optimize that landing page, like we just talked about, for your goals. So if your goal is really highly qualified leads, you need to find the right balance there between, how long your form is going to be versus how much conversion you need in order to get the number of leads that you want. So now you're actually at the webinar. Now, when you're here, a couple things to keep in mind. You want to start strong, and you want to capture people's attention right off the bat. I loved Kate's idea of doing a poll, because it kind of gets you guys into the spirit of things right away, starts to get you guys clicking. You're not just kind of hanging back and waiting for us to start. You also want to encourage interaction. And again, the poll is a great way to do this. The Q&A section we're going to do in a minute is a great way to do this. And as much as possible, kind of engaging with the audience generally works a little bit better, keeps people engaged for a little bit longer. And of course, after the webinar, guys, you want to follow up as quickly as possible, not just with the attendees, but with your partners. If you're partnering up with somebody on a webinar and you're, sharing the leads from that webinar, for example, always make sure that you're quick with them in terms of the follow-up. And sending the slides and the recordings, I think, are a great way to repurpose content. We also repurpose our webinars as on-demand webinars, and we really look at different ways to actually syndicate them, and that's worked really well for ongoing lead generation from stuff that we've already done and already recorded. So it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving, which is kind of great. So a couple quick takeaways, guys, before we get into the Q&A. So number one, we talked about keeping your content sassy, so scalable, actionable, shareable, scalable, and view-oriented, so really important to kind of keep that in mind when it comes to the overall experience. Try and tailor that content experience and really personalize it. Make sure that it's relevant to the people that you're talking to. When it comes to call to actions, that really goes hand in hand with tailoring the content experience. You want them to be clear, contextual, and targeted. You want to be gating that valuable content because that's going to help with your lead generation. And you want really focused topics to drive quality leads. And yes, that goes hand in hand with webinars, but really that comes down to any of your lead gen content that you're creating. And last but not least, test, because you never know what's going to work and what's going to start to move the needle for you. So, Kate, I feel like I've been rambling, but I'm ready for some questions if you're ready.
Not rambling at all. It was wonderful content, really helpful for me. I actually loved your advice about the overlay instead of the landing page.
Hello.
And we, guys, so you know, in the audience, we're going to be using Uberflip here. We're really excited about it. So some of those tips are extra applicable for us now. But I have
hearing you right now. And
you can't hear me.
Bear with me for a quick second. I'm just going to swap them out.
Okay. I will keep talking with a quick offer about our next webinar, which is on October 22nd with Josh Burnoff. It's how to stand out by writing without bullshit. It's going to be a very exciting event. He's super funny and super knowledgeable, so we'd love for you guys to be there. It's at writeraccess.com/writer webinar. I'm going to put that in the chat box for you guys. And we have a fun surprise. Byron actually made it. He finished his session and caught some of your content and has great questions for you from personal questions and from the audience, so he's going to chime in with Q&A. Are you there, Byron?
Yes. Can you guys hear me? And Hannah, can you hear us?
Yes, I can now hear you. It seems
Yay,
my headset was wonky a little bit, but we're good.
Great. Well, I'm a massive fan of Hannah's and was excited to catch this. And great job, Hannah. Really great stuff. Naturally, I have several hundred questions for you. I caught I caught you at around halftime, so Kate might have some other questions in the front half that she can stream along, including any questions from the audience. So, but I'll just ask a couple that I'd love to get your take on. Regarding CTA overlays, you may or may not remember the days when we all freaked out that such overlays would have an organic effect, potentially a negative effect, on websites. Where is Google with that these days? Are you seeing any penalty from Google for a landing page that are featuring overlays?
Actually, we're not at this point. And really, for us, for the CTA overlays, the way we've got them structured with Uberflip is that the page is still totally indexable. People are still finding it. There's no real issue with it. And I would imagine most of the technology now, whether it's a CTA overlay or just a pop-up, has now sort of found a way to work with Google as opposed to against Google. So we haven't seen any penalty on our end, nor have our customers.
Got it. And another question is, I noticed that some of the assets that you were promoting downloads on we're featuring authors.
Mm-hmm.
If your authors are not that grandiose and world famous, what is your take on saying who the author is versus not saying who the author is, or if your authors are internal, employees within the companies pushing out the content? Do you think that helps or hurts an asset from being downloaded and people developing interest on?
Yeah, I think it really depends. I think you're right in that, if the author is a little bit more notable, like in the example I showed with Joanna Wiebe, I mean, Joanna's, great copywriter, and I think she's got a great online presence in her own right, so it's kind of a no-brainer to put her up there. But for example, we've written ebooks where we've had somebody internal write them that's maybe not quite as well-known as Joanna. So I think in that case, you have to play around with, okay, maybe still having the author there might make sense because it's less about their notoriety and more about just humanizing the page and giving them a face to relate to. But the other option there is maybe looking at doing a little bit of social proof. So if you can kind of share a version of your ebook with a handful of people and ask them to give you a little testimonial about how great it was, that's another really good option for a landing page. Is instead of trying to elevate the page by sharing sort of a super famous author, then maybe go with the social proof angle, the testimonial angle.
Right on. Another question regarding gating content. I didn't know if you meant like building a resource library and having people either pay to access that or just an asset that somebody has to do something to download it, whether it be fill in a form versus or whatever. Could you talk about your definition of gating off content, and do you just mean a lead generation gate or a paid gate or both? And if so, how girthy does your content library need to be if you're asking people to pay to access your library? So there you go.
Yeah, so in this context, I was really more referring to sort of gating individual pieces of content that may sit in a resource library or not. So it's kind of that landing page or that form, and they're really only paying with like an email address. And we're seeing a lot of people house this premium content on their resource center. But in the context of creating sort of a more robust resource center where actually it's almost like pay to play, like really pay to access those resources, that's where I think you do need to have some really high value content. And it's hard to put a number on it because at the end of the day, it just really depends on how much people want your stuff, right? So if your stuff is really good and I'm willing to pay, X amount of dollars for 5 really great in-depth white papers, then that might be great. But if for a lot of companies are going to need more to kind of create that membership. So, I mean, you've seen examples of this, like Marketing Profs does this really well, where they have like a membership type program, and a lot of their content and their courses is paid, right? So you have to be a member to access all of that stuff. So does a company called Demand Metric, where they're more around like white papers and research reports. They're more of an analyst type company. So both models work, but to be honest, like if your pure goal is lead generation, I would not charge. I would focus on optimizing the gate for each individual piece of content, and then potentially taking all of those and putting those in a resource center or content library or something along those lines.
Here's a quick hot tip for motivators as well, and I'd love your take on this. So, with the advent of self-publishing, you can now sort of publish a book and sell it on Amazon, but you can feature the book as a free downloadable asset, but also showcase the fact that you could buy it on Amazon for $15.99 or get it free here to go through the gate. Have you seen that be successful, and do you believe in that as a concept?
I do believe in it as a concept. I think that's an interesting one. I think, most of the sort of customers that we deal with, and most of the time, we're really dealing more with leveraging that content asset, that ebook or whatever it might be, as a means to an end. So really leveraging it for more customers as opposed to turning the actual content into the product. But I do think that's super valid. That's really interesting, actually.
Yeah. We talked about HubSpot and again in this sort of lead gen format. Do you think that companies like HubSpot, when they're asking for like 14 fields of information, do you think that there's a point where they have earned the right to ask that information?
Yeah, that's a really great question.
Is there a pivot point? And so when you're starting out with lead generation or asset development, you can't be too aggressive, even if your sales department is demanding all of this data and information. What's your take on that?
That's a really, really great point, and I totally agree. So, when we take a look at HubSpot, listen, like HubSpot gets millions of visitors, whereas, most of us don't get anywhere near the same kind of traffic that HubSpot does. So HubSpot can afford to do a couple of things. Number one, HubSpot can afford to sacrifice a little bit on conversion in order to increase quality. They can afford to do that. But if you're just building up your audience and you don't have the same same level of audience that HubSpot does, for example, you don't want to have too much friction between somebody coming in and accessing a piece of content. If you're brand new out of the gate, I would argue that, the shorter the form, the better to a degree, because that's going to convert better for you. And like I said, like at Uberflip, we kind of try and find that happy medium now. I think we've started to, build a pretty robust audience base, so we can start to add more forms. But even us, like we don't like to go more than 3 or 4 forms in a go, or fields rather.
My grandmother from Texas has a great expression for that. With her southern drawl, she used to say, "Byron Henry White, don't you get too big for your britches."
Love it.
Meaning, don't ask for too many fields of information on your lead generation forms, or people will run for the hills. Hey,
That's
one more
amazing.
question, and I'm sure Kate's going to have some fun questions for you too.
Cool.
So, getting started with webinars, we've been blessed 6 years ago to start our webinar series, and have done like 60 or something crazy. But when you're just starting out with webinars and you don't have the audience, what's your take on, maybe paying somebody to be a guest speaker and really coming out of the gates with an awesome speaker that is, really has terrific content that's well rehearsed, and just spending some money up front to come out of the gates the right way? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think if you've got the budget for it, I definitely think that that's a great approach. I think a couple things to keep in mind is you want to make sure that the speaker obviously has an audience sort of pre-built, and also has an audience that is aligned with the type of people that you want to be talking to, right? But I definitely think that there's value in that. And there's also value in taking a look at some really targeted distribution channels, leading up to the webinar. So, it's not a matter of just creating the content or setting up the webinar landing page and putting it out there. There's some really targeted ways that you can actually get people to opt into your webinar without spending tons and tons of money, with a very nominal budget. And even things like promoted tweets, but making them incredibly targeted. So one example would be, we were doing a partner webinar with Marketo not that long ago. So we spent a little bit of money doing some promoted tweets. It was by no means a big budget, but what we did was we targeted people that followed Marketo because it made total sense, right? So there's a lot of those channels you can use. Pretty much any of the social media channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, allow for those really robust targeting options. So that's another thing that you can take into account. And then if you've also got that really high-profile speaker, use that in those distribution channels. So create the images around the social media. So like have those Twitter cards and that really great picture of that speaker, right, to catch people's attention. Same thing with Facebook. Highlight the fact that you got that speaker. So I think getting all of those things working in tandem can make a really big impact in driving registrants.
Great tips and tactic, Hana. Over to you, Kate. Big fan, Hana, though. Keep up the great work. Over to you,
Thanks
Kate.
so much, Byron.
Wonderful. I'm glad you could chime in with some of those questions. They're really, really insightful and helpful. So glad you could make it, Byron. And I do have some from the audience here that we're going to try and plow through.
Great.
So one of our questions, actually, while you're still on the phone, Byron, I might have you chime in as well. So we have, Hana, part of our platform is that we have freelance writers that work with clients on various pieces of content, and some of them are wondering on what kinds of questions can they, as a freelance writer, ask the client to help to create this awesome content that converts. So they're not the in-house marketer. They're being outsourced to. They're sort of outside of the conversion goals, that type of conversation. So what questions would you recommend they ask to help optimize the content they're creating for conversions?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think that goes, whether they're in-house or not in-house, I think a lot of the times the content creation is not aligned with the goals in general, whether it's sort of internal or external, regardless of who's creating the content. So a couple of things that I think will help is even just having a one-page brief, which is kind of what we started to do, which I think you guys do too, to a certain degree. And really understanding, number one, what the primary goal for this content is. So we did that poll at the very beginning, and is the primary goal brand awareness? Is it lead generation? Is it et cetera, et cetera? Understanding that right away is going to help, because it's going to help you as a content creator craft the content in a way where there's opportunities to have those call to actions in there. And you can still talk about a topic in a way that's not pitchy or salesy, salesy, but still leave an opportunity to actually relate to whatever the product is that you're promoting or whatever the sale is that you're promoting. So understanding the primary goal, I think, is key. Also understanding how the content will be distributed, I think, is helpful as well, and specifically the audience. Yeah, like, and the audience too is the biggest one, is how, like, who's the audience? Who are going to be the people that are looking at this, and what do you want them to do at the end of it?
Awesome. So who's the audience, and what are we expecting them to do with this content? Those are great questions.
Yeah.
I would also just spin on that a little bit. First of all, what a wonderful question from a writer that wants to create great content, is sort of limited perhaps in descriptions coming through the Writer Access platform. Hallelujah. Thank you for that question. Wish everyone had that energy. I think the key is really, writers at Writer Access and everywhere are like journalists. They need to find the story. They need to, dig under the covers to find the juice and to really get the core issues. I think the way to do that is to take a look at what content is trying to be created and come up with specific questions around the content that the client is requesting, showing they've done their homework. And to throw radical ideas, both conservative ideas and radical ideas, on a potential spin for the story, right? But I also think it's earning trust with customers and creating initial projects successfully, but earning their trust and eventually having customers pitch ideas to them. I mean, that's what our Writer Access writers should be doing, is hoping that customers will submit orders that are almost blank, saying, pitch me an idea. And I think that's where the great content is really going to come from. Sorry, go ahead.
Cool.
Wonderful. I know we're over our time. Do you have a couple more minutes for questions, Hana?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. So my next one is, you talked about gating content. It talks about gating content that was ungated previously. So how do you go about making that change, gating content that was originally ungated, as well as you talked about paid gated content versus free gated content? How would you go about making those switches? They're kind of tricky to navigate.
Yeah, I to be honest, don't remember specifically saying gating something that was ungated, but just kind of just clarifying, I guess. I suppose you could do that in terms of repurposing content that was previously ungated. So, for example, we've done this before, where we'll have 5 blog posts about a particular topic. We took that, we massaged it a bit, turned it into an ebook, and then gated it. So that's something that you can take a look at. I think at the end of the day, if you are going to gate content, the important thing is going to be whether or not it's actually valuable content. The one example I think that they might be thinking of is the on-demand webinar. So we did sort of take that content and gate it after the webinar was over. But in either case, there was always a forum. And when I say, paying to access the content, I am often talking about paying with an email address, right? I'm not talking about actually paying with dollars. So, and I think that's how we need to start to think about it as well, is, I don't think we need to think about how much money can we get for our content. And really, again, if the content is a means to an end, so if it's a stepping stone to turn something into a customer, you shouldn't be charging for it. But let me say that, you shouldn't be charging money for it, but you should be charging email addresses. And that's what I really mean about when I talk about paying for content.
Awesome. That's very helpful and very clear. What do you think about, this is a question also about gating, sections of a site that have access to content versus individual pieces of content?
Yeah, I think that's also a great approach. We have some of our customers doing that. It works really well for them. So instead of gating, for example, each individual webinar in sort of the webinar section of their resource center, they'll just gate that whole section. And then once you fill out the form once, you have access to all of the webinars.
And what are some of the unique challenges you might run into with that?
Yeah, so, I mean, it really just all comes down to how much you want to kind of measure the engagement in terms of how many times you want people to opt into something. I know it just sort of depends on where you sit on the marketing spectrum. It's kind of more a philosophy thing than anything else. So if you want to just make it as easy as possible for people to access that content, then I would recommend, just have them fill out the form once and give them access to that whole section. But if you want people to have to actually opt in every single time, which is not necessarily a bad thing and keeps things clear in terms of, making sure you understand that they're really engaged, you can do that too. It really just comes down to what your philosophy is on how you want people to sort of access your content and what you want to do at the end of the day in terms of generating leads. I don't know that there's more challenges doing one over the other. The advantage of getting each individual piece of content is if you're using something like progressive profiling, you can kind of keep the forms short, and then you can continue to collect more data about people as they fill out more forms. So that's one advantage of using sort of gating each individual piece of content. But again, just gating the section is probably easier for people to access, right? And get a little bit less friction that way. So it all depends.
Makes sense. Depends on your goals. Okay, so here is going to be our last question. This is from earlier on when you were talking about emailing out blog posts, and you were talking about driving traffic from your blog, from your company blog. Now this question asks, are you recommending emailing blog posts to subscribers even though they're already subscribed? And their post is already showing up in their inbox. It sounds like this individual, because they're already, when a user is subscribed to them, they get the blog post in their inbox. So are you recommending something different than the standard subscription to blog auto emails, or is that what you're recommending?
If you have an auto email set up, that's great. Yeah. A lot of people don't. So what a lot of people do, and that's really what it is, right? It's like as soon as the blog post goes up, an email goes out to them, and that's all sort of I meant by that path. But what some companies do is they'll set up the capture, they'll get the blog subscribers, but then they don't have anything automated to actually send the blog post on a regular basis. So that's exactly what you should be doing is, as soon as you get that subscriber, you can send it. A couple of other things to keep in mind when it comes to the blog post. One interesting strategy that you might want to consider is when somebody signs up for your blog, instead of just rolling them into kind of sending them the next piece of content and the next blog post and the next blog post, you might want to think about putting them into a sort of special workflow or email campaign that actually drips them the best content over maybe a week or 2 weeks, and then roll them into the regular updates, because if they're signing up, they might have missed out on a whole bunch of really great high-converting content that you've already created, right? And you don't want to rely on them to go fishing through your blog or your resource center, your content hub for that content. So that's something that you might want to consider doing is like have a special workflow for new blog subscribers. Let them finish out that email campaign where for the first week or 2 weeks they're getting like the highest value blog posts from you, and then roll them into sort of the regular daily subscriptions. And it's a little bit more work to set up, but it might be really worth it for you if you've got some blog posts in there that they really need to be reading, especially if they're potential customers for you.
Wonderful. Well, that was really helpful. I think we answered all or most of the questions. If you guys have any questions left over, feel free to send them via email. I'll put my email, kate@writeraccess, in the chat at writeraccess.com. And you can always go on Twitter, Hana, Abaza, Uberflip, Writer Access. We're all we will be anxiously awaiting any additional questions. We really appreciate your time today, Hana. It's just a delight to have you, and I learned a lot, and I'm excited to go try out some of the things I personally learned, and I hope our attendees are as well.
Thanks so much, Kate.
Back. Yeah.
Thank you. Super happy to be here.
Great. And that's all. We hope to see you guys next month at our next webinar, and we appreciate you all joining. Have a wonderful rest of your week.